The energy sleeping at the base of your spine isn't a myth. It's the truth they never taught you. Because if you knew how powerful you really are, this world would collapse overnight. They told you your body was just flesh, your mind just thoughts, and your purpose just survival. But what they didn't tell you, what they couldn't afford for you to know, is that within you lies a force capable of dissolving illusion, transcending fear, and awakening the deepest wisdom buried in your being. This isn't philosophy, it's biology. A dormant intelligence lives inside of you, coiled like a serpent, waiting to rise. And when it does, your perception of reality, of yourself, fractures and rebuilds into something unshakably real. They called it dangerous, mystical, even madness, but it was never any of those things. It was freedom, and freedom doesn't fit into their plan. This is not a secret anymore. This is Kundalini, and it's time you remember what you already are. For most of your life, they taught you to fear your own power. They dressed it up in language that made it sound mythical, unreachable, even dangerous. And in doing so, they buried one of the oldest and most sacred truths known to humanity, that deep within you is a force not born of imagination, but of divine design. Kundalini isn't a concept to be studied in textbooks or debated in spiritual circles. It's a living energy, a blueprint of evolution encoded into every human being, silently waiting to be remembered. This force, often symbolized as a serpent coiled 3.5 times at the base of the spine, is not some ancient superstition. The serpent is a metaphor, but it's also more than that. Across ancient cultures, from the Egyptians' Uraeus to the Vedic texts of India, the serpent represented transformation, inner alchemy, and divine awareness. The coiling isn't random. It reflects the spiral structure of DNA, the helix of galaxies, the rhythm of breath. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are a microcosm of it. Kundalini is the bridge. At its core, Kundalini is dormant potential. Not potential in the motivational sense, but in the literal, biological, spiritual sense. The potential to see reality as it truly is, unfiltered by programming, culture, fear, or identity. When awakened, this energy travels up the spine, activating and purifying the energetic centers of the body known as chakras. But this isn't just about energy in the poetic sense. Those who have truly felt it know, it burns, it clears, it strips away everything false. It's not always blissful. Sometimes it breaks you before it rebuilds you, but it always leads you back to the truth. Most people misunderstand Kundalini because they've only heard fragments of it. New Age repackaging, pop spirituality slogans, or incomplete practices taken out of context. Some treat it like a shortcut to enlightenment. Others avoid it completely out of fear. But Kundalini is neither shortcut nor a superstition. It's a path that demands reverence, commitment, and the willingness to let go of everything you think you are. Because this energy doesn't play by the rules of ego. It rewrites the rules entirely. Your body has been built to hold this power, but it must be prepared to receive it. Ancient traditions understood this and mapped it out through breathwork, movement, mantra, and meditation. But these weren't rituals for the sake of tradition. They were tools designed to strengthen the vessel, to stabilize the nervous system, to create space for this sacred fire, to rise without consuming the psyche. Without preparation, awakening this energy prematurely can lead to confusion, spiritual distortion, and even psychological breakdown. But when approached with humility and intention, Kundalini becomes the most profound teacher you will ever know. It shows you not what to believe, but what to unlearn. There are layers to this that can't be said openly. That's why we created Insights Academy, our free newsletter where we share the teachings kept behind the curtain. Sign up below and receive a free copy of the Kybalion, but only for a limited time. You see, awakening isn't something that happens to other people. It's happening all around you, all the time. The only difference is whether you're aware of it. Spontaneous awakenings are becoming more common as collective consciousness shifts, but without context, they're often mistaken for breakdowns, anxiety disorders, or disorientation. The modern world has no framework for what the ancients mastered, and so people suffer in silence, not realizing they are in the early stages of transformation. Kundalini is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming who you truly are, beneath the conditioning, the trauma, the roles you play. It's not an escape from life, but a deeper immersion into it. More presence, more awareness, more capacity to love, to feel, to see. The serpent within isn't evil, chaotic, or mythical. It is sacred. It is you. Not the you they trained you to be, but the one that remembers. The one that can't be bought, broken, or silenced. Once it awakens, there is no going back. But why would you want to? Most people think of chakras as colorful wheels on posters, floating along the spine like spiritual decor, abstract ideas, easy to dismiss. But those symbols represent something far more real and far more consequential than most realize. Chakras are not fantasies. They are the subtle power centers of your consciousness, the inner architecture that governs how you think, feel, act, and evolve. They are not mystical embellishments. They are the energy circuitry of your being, and until you understand them, you will always be reacting to life instead of mastering it. Each chakra is a frequency, an expression of your state of consciousness mapped to the body. They aren't physical organs, but they influence every part of your physical, emotional, and psychological existence. The root is survival. The sacral is emotion and desire. The solar plexus is will and identity. The heart is love, not the romantic kind, but the infinite, fearless kind. The throat is truth. The third eye is perception. And the crown is unity, pure, expansive awareness beyond thought. You were born with these centers open, responsive, alive. Then life happened. Conditioning, fear, shame. They didn't just weigh on your mind, they clogged the system. You don't rise in Kundalini through force. You rise through clearing. Energy moves where energy is allowed. That's why people feel stuck or weighed down. They're living with blocked or overactive chakras, often without ever knowing it. Every emotional wound you carry, every betrayal, repression, lie, or inherited belief stores itself in your subtle system. You might feel it as anxiety in your chest, tightness in your stomach, or a lump in your throat you can never quite speak through. That isn't just stress, it's an energetic knot. The awakening process unties those knots, one by one. And the truth is, it's not always graceful. As Kundalini rises, it doesn't just light up chakras like checkpoints on a game board. It pierces through them. It confronts the illusions and traumas that reside there. It shows you what needs to be felt, faced, and finally released. That's why true awakening is painful for many, not because something's wrong, but because something buried is being unearthed. Repressed grief surfaces. Childhood wounds come back into focus. You remember things you thought were long gone, not to hurt you, but to set you free. When the chakras are open and balanced, life flows through you. You don't chase clarity, it finds you. You don't force expression, it happens. You don't perform love, you become it. This isn't spiritual fantasy. This is energetic reality. A nervous system in coherence. A psyche in alignment. A consciousness no longer held hostage by unconscious survival programs. This is what it means to be truly awake, not floating off into detachment, but rooted, alert, alive in every part of your being. Each chakra is both a key and a test. It offers you a gift, but only when you face its challenge can you feel your fear and still stay rooted. That's the root chakra. Can you feel desire without being consumed by it? That's the sacral. Can you own your truth without domination? That's the solar plexus. These aren't abstract meditations. They're embodied lessons. Lessons your own life will keep repeating until you finally integrate them. And when energy rises from the base to the top, you don't become more than human. You finally become fully human. The chakras were never about escape. They are your map home. A map written in your own body. A body that's been trying to speak to you for years, if not lifetimes. You were never disconnected. You were just conditioned to ignore the language of your own soul. Awakening isn't beautiful at first. That's the lie most people aren't prepared to face. They imagine Kundalini as a lightning bolt of bliss, an instant enlightenment, a spiritual shortcut to happiness. But when the serpent stirs, it doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you need. And often what you need is destruction, not of your life, but of everything false within it. The moment Kundalini begins to move, things shift. And not just in meditation or dreams, your whole perception of reality begins to change. Time stretches and collapses. You may feel detached from your identity, as if watching yourself from the outside. Old memories erupt without warning. Your body heats up, vibrates, shakes, or shuts down entirely. You might feel a sudden surge of energy moving up your spine, like electricity looking for a place to land. Or you might feel nothing at all, just an inner restlessness that refuses to be ignored. It can feel divine. It can feel like madness. And sometimes, it's both. For some, the symptoms are physical: insomnia, racing heart, digestive issues, vertigo, or spontaneous body movements. For others, the psychological upheaval hits harder: anxiety, derealization, mood swings, or emotional flashbacks. This is not a malfunction. It is your system reorganizing itself, and the chaos you feel. That's the collapse of an outdated self trying to hold on. Kundalini is not just rising, it is dismantling. Layer by layer, belief by belief, identity by identity, until there's nothing left but what is real. What most don't realize is that there are stages to this process. It doesn't all happen in a weekend retreat. It unfolds over months, sometimes years. The initial awakening might come in a flash, sudden, inexplicable, irreversible. But what follows is integration. And that part is far more difficult than the initial experience. Because now, you have to live differently. You have to unlearn habits, detox thoughts, and rewire responses you didn't even know were programmed. You don't just see the world differently, you feel it differently. People you once resonated with fall away. Jobs lose their meaning. Desires fade or shift dramatically. And in that space, you're left with a haunting question: who am I now? This is the phase many mistake for something going wrong. Friends call it a breakdown. Doctors label it anxiety. But what you're experiencing is death, not of the body, but of the ego. The false self begins to lose its grip, and it fights back. That's why so many people stop the process. They cling to familiarity, even if it means suffocating their own soul. But if you stay with it, if you trust what's unfolding, you begin to realize you're not losing your mind. You're finding your soul. And then something incredible happens. The chaos doesn't disappear, but it no longer owns you. You start to witness it instead of being consumed by it. Emotions rise and pass without breaking you. The body recalibrates. Synchronicities multiply. Your dreams become messages. Your senses sharpen, and your awareness deepens. You start to see energy, not metaphorically, but truly. You feel what's true before it's spoken. You begin to live from intuition rather than reaction. And for the first time, you understand what it means to be truly alive, raw, present, and unfiltered. But you must remember, this is not the finish line. It is the beginning. Awakening is not the goal. It's the gate. A gate that opens into a landscape of mystery, discipline, and continual refinement. Many reach this threshold and think they've arrived. But true awakening humbles you. It makes you quiet. It strips away the need to convince anyone of anything. Because once you've seen the truth, you stop performing. You simply become it. Kundalini is not a reward. It is a responsibility. And while the idea of sudden awakening may sound alluring, the truth is, unprepared bodies and minds can shatter under its intensity. This energy is sacred, not because it's rare, but because it's raw. It doesn't care about your beliefs, your spiritual identity, or how many books you've read. It only cares about one thing: Are you ready to carry the fire without burning everything down? That readiness doesn't come from theory. It comes from practice. Discipline is the silent architect of awakening. Not the rigid, ego-driven kind that demands perfection, but the kind that sharpens presence, strengthens the vessel, and clears the internal debris left by years of unconscious living. Kundalini rises where there is space, and space is created through devotion, not to a religion, but to the inner reality that exists beyond the noise. Breath is one of the first gateways. Not the shallow, unconscious breath most of us have learned to survive on, but deep, intentional breathing that reconnects the mind to the body and the body to the soul. Practices like pranayama weren't invented for stress relief. They were created to prepare the subtle system to hold a voltage it was never trained to handle. The breath moves energy. It clears blockages. It stokes the internal flame. When done with presence, breath alone can begin to activate dormant layers of consciousness. Then there is movement, kriya, asana, and spontaneous expression. Not performance, not exercise, but movement, as a conversation with your own energy. Every stretch, every twist, every flow is an offering. Not to the outside world, but to the inner sanctum where your transformation is taking place. The spine is the pathway of Kundalini, and every time you move it consciously, you're preparing the serpent's ascent. Mantra and sound come next. These aren't affirmations or chants for mood enhancement. They are vibrational codes that unlock energy from the inside. The ancient syllables, repeated with intention, start to reprogram the nervous system and reshape the mental field. Words carry frequency, and certain mantras are designed to activate specific chakras or calm the mind enough for deeper states to emerge. You're not just saying something, you're becoming it. Stillness is just as vital. The capacity to sit with discomfort, to feel without reacting, to watch without controlling. That is where the nervous system becomes stable enough to integrate Kundalini's intensity. Meditation isn't escape, it's exposure. When you sit in silence long enough, everything rises, your doubts, your fears, your buried memories. But that's the point. Kundalini is not interested in your comfort. It's interested in your clarity, and you only find that clarity by facing what's underneath. Without discipline, awakening becomes dangerous. People try to skip the foundation and go straight to the fireworks. They chase energy highs, visions, and mystical experiences without building the capacity to handle them. That's why some crash. That's why some break. The system was never meant to awaken all at once without preparation. The ancient yogis knew this. They trained for years, not to force awakening, but to deserve it. Because when Kundalini rises in an unprepared vessel, it can trigger emotional flooding, psychological breakdown, even long-term energetic imbalance. But when it rises in a prepared one, it becomes the most stabilizing, illuminating, and healing force you will ever encounter. Not because it changes you into someone else, but because it burns away everything that isn't you. The modern world has convinced people that discipline is a limitation, that routine kills freedom. But in the realm of energy, discipline is liberation. It gives your mind structure, your body resilience, and your spirit room to move. Discipline isn't a prison, it's the doorway to power. And not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind that anchors you in truth when everything around you is built on lies. True spiritual work doesn't care about how enlightened you look. It cares about how much truth your body can hold without flinching. And that kind of strength can't be faked. It must be forged, daily, quietly, repeatedly, until the vessel becomes clear and the serpent rises not in chaos, but in grace. Kundalini isn't a toy, and yet that's exactly what it's become in today's diluted spiritual marketplace. Another buzzword, another hashtag, another mystical aesthetic repackaged for quick consumption. But make no mistake, this is not a path you casually wander into for entertainment. It's not a weekend retreat, a colorful aura photo, or an Instagram caption under a sunset. Kundalini, when it truly awakens, doesn't upgrade your personality. It destroys it. And unless you've built the capacity to let that happen, What begins as illumination can very quickly descend into disorientation, delusion, and even danger. One of the greatest threats to modern seekers isn't the energy itself. It's the way it's misunderstood and misused. There's a growing culture of people chasing spiritual experiences like trophies, treating energetic awakenings like achievements to show off. But Kundalini doesn't care about your story. It doesn't feed the ego. It burns it. And if you try to turn that fire into fuel for superiority, it will turn on you. Ego inflation is one of the first and most common traps. The moment someone starts using their awakening to feel more important, more special, or more evolved than others, they've already lost the plot. Real awakening makes you quieter, not louder. It deepens humility, not self-importance. And then there's spiritual psychosis, something few talk about, but many suffer through silently. This happens when Kundalini energy rises without sufficient grounding, preparation, or integration. People begin to see visions, feel disembodied, experience intense emotional flooding, or identity fragmentation. They mistake symbolic dreams for literal prophecy, confuse emotional trauma with cosmic messages, and detach from reality believing they've ascended. But they haven't ascended. They've fractured. And in a world with no framework for this process, they're often dismissed, medicated, or institutionalized. This is why the ancient traditions were so rigorous. Not because they wanted to withhold knowledge, but because they understood the weight of what they were unlocking. You weren't just learning about chakras or mantras. You were being trained to survive a fire that burns everything false within you. And without that training, people mistake emotional breakdowns for enlightenment. They seek more energy when what they really need is more integration. Because Kundalini won't just show you your divinity, it will show you your shadow. And if you're not ready to face it, it will consume you. Modern spiritual culture rarely mentions this. Too often, we're sold the aesthetic without the depth. Pretty words, filtered rituals, love and light mantras that skip over the inner war most people are carrying. And into that space walk the false teachers, the self-proclaimed gurus, the energy healers with no lineage, the influencers repackaging ancient systems into watered-down products. They promise instant ascension, fast-track awakenings, and healing without the hard work. But there is no bypass. There is no shortcut. There is only the path, and the path asks everything of you. True teachers don't make you dependent. They point you inward. They teach you to rely on your own discernment, to stabilize your own system, to listen to your own energy. If a guide ever positions themselves as your savior, run. Kundalini doesn't flow through hierarchy. It flows through honesty. The moment someone uses your awakening to feed their power, they've corrupted the sacred. But even without external deception, the greatest danger often comes from within. When the energy begins to move, it amplifies everything. Your love, your fear, your desires, your rage. Whatever is unresolved will rise to the surface. That's not a flaw. That's the point. But if you've spent your life suppressing pain, clinging to control, or resisting change, this phase can feel like psychological annihilation. And that's exactly why preparation is everything. Because when it hits, you won't have time to research your way through it. You'll either have the internal structure to hold yourself, or you'll break. That's not said to scare you. It's said to remind you, this is real. This isn't just another spiritual path. It's the path that strips away illusion at its root. The path that shows you not the light instead of the dark, but the light through the dark. It is sacred, it is powerful, and it is merciless to anything not built in truth. Which is exactly why it's the most transformative force you will ever encounter, if you walk it with courage, with humility, and with eyes wide open. You've been taught to see the world through division, this and that, self and other, right and wrong, light and dark. Separation isn't just how we organize reality, it's how we're conditioned to believe reality is. But when Kundalini reaches its peak, that illusion collapses. Not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a direct, visceral experience. The lines you've drawn between yourself and everything else begin to blur, and eventually, they dissolve. This is non-dual awareness, and once it arrives, nothing looks the same again. In ordinary states of consciousness, you're the observer, looking out at life like a subject interacting with objects. But non-duality isn't about detachment from reality. It's about realizing there is no gap between you and reality in the first place. You are not a wave within the ocean. You are the ocean, momentarily shaped into a wave. Kundalini, in its full rise, doesn't stop at mystical visions or energetic bliss. It keeps moving until it reaches the crown, until your sense of separation melts into the truth that there is only consciousness, aware of itself, through itself. This isn't a belief you adopt. It's a knowing you become. And ironically, the moment you arrive there, there's nothing to declare. No need to explain, convince, or validate, because truth at that level becomes silent. Language fails. The mind slows down. You begin to operate from a place deeper than thought. There is no longer a you trying to awaken. There is only awakening, moving through what you once called you. This is why many mystics, sages, and realized beings seem quiet, simple, unbothered. It's not detachment, it's fullness. There's no longer a compulsion to prove or to protect, because the self they once defended has been seen for what it was, a useful costume, not a permanent identity. And with that comes the most liberating paradox. You still function in the world. You still feel joy, pain, hunger, and love. But you no longer believe those experiences define you. You are the sky, not the weather. Non-dual awareness isn't a state you visit during meditation. It becomes the lens through which you live. You notice when the ego tries to reattach. You witness fear arise and dissolve without gripping onto it. You hear someone else's anger and don't take it personally, because you understand their storm is also yours. Not in a metaphorical way, but in the same way that all waves belong to one ocean. You stop needing to win arguments, chase status, or guard your story. There's nothing left to defend, and in that absence of resistance, an entirely new way of living emerges. Kundalini brings you here not to elevate you above others, but to dismantle the illusion that you were ever separate from them. That moment you realize you're not your thoughts, not your body, not even your name. That's the moment you begin to remember. And what you remember is not new knowledge, it's ancient. It's the same truth that echoed through the Upanishads, that Christ hinted at when he said, "I and the Father are one," that Lao Tzu whispered in verses no one could translate fully. All of them trying to express the inexpressible, that you are not just in the universe, you are the universe, aware of itself. But this awareness doesn't grant immunity from life. You still live it. You still bleed. You still suffer. The difference is, suffering loses its identity. It becomes passing weather instead of personal crisis. Fear becomes energy instead of limitation. Even death begins to lose its grip, because when the boundary between you and everything dissolves, the fear of ending no longer makes sense. How can that which was never separate ever truly die? Non-duality is not about escaping the human experience. It's about becoming fully human, with the full understanding that there is nothing outside of you to fight, and nothing within you to fix. You don't float above the world, you finally drop into it, naked, aware, present. And from that stillness, life begins again, not as a journey towards something, but as the expression of something that never left. Consciousness, wearing your face, speaking through your voice, seeing itself in every moment. The end of separation isn't the end of the story. It's the first time you're finally reading the truth between the lines. For centuries, the language of science and the language of spirit lived in different worlds. One measured what could be seen and touched, while the other explored what could only be felt and known. But as the veil between disciplines begins to thin, even the scientific world can no longer ignore what mystics have described for millennia. Kundalini, once dismissed as esoteric metaphor, is now being examined through the lens of neuroscience, physiology, and quantum biology. and the findings are beginning to echo what ancient texts have whispered all along. The human body is not just a mechanical system, it's a symphony of frequencies, rhythms, and fields. And Kundalini is not some foreign energy that enters you, it's a latent system within your biology, waiting to be activated. When it rises, it doesn't bypass the body, it transforms it. People experiencing Kundalini awakenings report symptoms that directly involve the central nervous system: heightened sensitivity, electric currents running up the spine, spontaneous body movements, altered perception of time, and expanded awareness. These aren't hallucinations. They are physiological realities, measurable and consistent across cultures, ages, and belief systems. Modern science is beginning to catch up, slowly, awkwardly, and often without the vocabulary to articulate what's truly happening. Studies on advanced meditators, yogis, and monks have shown radical shifts in brainwave activity, often dropping into deep delta or rising into gamma frequencies while fully awake. Functional MRI scans reveal increased coherence across brain hemispheres, heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex, and reduced activity in the default mode network, the region associated with ego and identity. These are not just passive states of relaxation, they're states of reconfiguration, of the brain tuning itself to a higher operating frequency. And then there's the role of the spine and the vagus nerve, a superhighway of communication between the gut, heart, brain, and beyond. The very same channel ancient yogis identified as Sushumna Nadi, running through the chakras, is mirrored in the biological structure of the spinal cord and the cerebrospinal fluid that flows through it. Breathing techniques, bandhas, and meditative postures all influence this flow. They're not just spiritual rituals. They're bioenergetic tuning forks, activating dormant systems most of us never knew existed. One of the most fascinating overlaps lies in the pineal gland, a tiny structure in the center of the brain long associated with mystical experience. Modern imaging shows it plays a role in regulating melatonin, serotonin, and other neurochemicals that influence consciousness. But under certain conditions, such as intense breath work, deep meditation, or trauma, this gland may release endogenous DMT, a powerful compound associated with profound spiritual visions and near-death experiences. The ancients weren't romanticizing when they called this the third eye. They were describing a biological gateway to non-ordinary states of consciousness. Even quantum biology is entering the conversation. Studies on microtubules in the brain, coherence fields in the heart, and the entangled communication of cells point to a reality where consciousness may not be confined to the skull, but distributed throughout the body, or even beyond it. The energetic fields, once described in mystical terms, auras, chakras, prana, are beginning to be mapped through electromagnetic frequencies, infrared imaging, and biofield measurements. It's not that science is proving spirituality, it's that science is finally listening to it. But the truth is, this integration was never meant to be a war. Science and spirit were never enemies. They were different languages describing the same phenomena, one from the outside in, the other from the inside out. And Kundalini sits precisely at the intersection. It's not a belief system. It's an experiential technology, one that turns the body into an instrument of awakening and the mind into a conduit for higher intelligence. The deeper irony is that much of what science is now discovering was already encoded in ancient yogic texts, passed through oral traditions, and guarded by lineages who knew that awakening without wisdom leads to chaos. And now, in a world searching for meaning through screens and studies, those ancient codes are resurfacing, not to be worshipped, but to be lived. Kundalini is not anti-science. It is science, operating at a higher octave. A living technology of human evolution that bypasses dogma, dissolves division, and reveals what's always been hiding in plain sight. That the body is not just flesh, the brain is not the mind, and consciousness is not an accident. You are not just a human being trying to reach something divine. You are a divine system designed to remember what being human truly means. Awakening doesn't end when the energy rises. In many ways, that's where it truly begins. Because once the fire has moved through you, once the illusions have burned away, and the separation has dissolved, you're not meant to float above the world. You're meant to return to it, transformed. The true test of Kundalini isn't what you see in the peak moments. It's how you live when the visions fade, the bliss subsides, and the ordinary demands of life come knocking again. Integration is where your awakening becomes real. This is where most people get lost. They chase the mystical, the ecstatic, the dramatic. But Kundalini doesn't want you to escape life. It wants you to fully inhabit it. Embodiment means taking all that expanded awareness and pouring it into every moment. How you speak, how you listen, how you eat, how you move through a room. It's not about being high vibe all the time. It's about being radically present. Because once you've touched the infinite, the only thing left to master is the present. In daily life, this doesn't look glamorous. It looks like noticing your reactions before they turn into patterns. It looks like breathing deeply instead of lashing out. It looks like sitting with discomfort instead of bypassing it with spiritual platitudes. You start to realize that awakening doesn't eliminate your humanity. It refines it. You feel more, not less. You cry easier, not because you're weak, but because your armor has softened. Your intuition sharpens, not as a magic trick, but as a compass grounded in clarity. Life becomes sacred again, not because it's perfect, but because you are finally in it. Relationships change. You start to gravitate toward depth, authenticity, and resonance. The people who once validated your ego may no longer feel aligned, and that's okay. Integration often involves solitude, not as loneliness but as recalibration. You begin to see how many of your past choices were survival responses, echoes of programming, or echoes of someone else's dream. With clarity comes the courage to let go, not to reject the world, but to create space for something real. And in that space, your service emerges, not forced, not performative, but natural. Kundalini opens the heart, and a natural compassion flows through you, not as a duty, but as a way of being. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your presence speaks louder than your words. And when you act, it's not from a need to fix the world, but from a deep knowing that healing begins with alignment. Your actions become extensions of your essence. Your work may change. Your rhythm may slow. Your values will shift. What once seemed urgent, status, validation, control, starts to feel hollow. You crave simplicity, honesty, connection, not as an escape, but as the most powerful rebellion against a world built on distraction. You start to walk differently, not above others, but beside them, aware that the same spark you've awakened lives in them too, waiting. And that changes everything. Kundalini embodiment isn't about walking around proclaiming you're awakened. It's about living in a way that is so rooted, so clear, and so sincere that others feel something shift just by being around you. You're not trying to shine. You're not trying to teach. You're just being. And that's what makes you a mirror for others to see themselves more clearly. This is where spiritual maturity begins. When you realize that the goal was never to escape the world, but to show up in it with your whole self intact. Kundalini doesn't make you special. It makes you real. And in a world full of masks, there is nothing more revolutionary than authenticity. To live aligned, to speak truthfully, to love without conditions, to rest without guilt. That's the revolution the system never saw coming. The truth is, Kundalini won't give you a new life. It will ask you to live the one you already have, fully, consciously, and courageously. To walk as a bridge between the visible and the invisible, the grounded and the transcendent, the human and the divine. Because that's what you are, a living intersection of all things. And once you learn to live from that place, your very existence becomes medicine. Not for everyone, but for those who are ready. And that's more than enough. The great illusion isn't that you are asleep. The illusion is that waking up makes you more enlightened, more spiritual, more worthy. But Kundalini has no interest in inflating your image of yourself. It strips it, peels it, dissolves every false layer you've ever mistaken for truth. The journey isn't upward, it's inward. And what's waiting for you at the center is not a higher version of yourself. It's your original self, untouched by ideology, status, or fear. The part of you that remembers, the part that never needed saving. All the chakras, the serpent, the visions, the sacred sounds, they were never the goal. They were doorways. Symbols meant to guide you back to the only thing that's ever been real. Direct, unfiltered experience of who and what you are. When people speak of enlightenment, they often imagine detachment, bliss, endless peace. But real awakening, it's raw, it's sobering. It forces you to feel everything you've avoided and see everything you've denied. And in that confrontation, you don't rise above life, you finally step into it. Kundalini isn't about becoming something divine, it's about realizing you always were. The divine isn't a light beaming down from the heavens, it's the pulse inside your chest, the breath moving through your body, the silence between your thoughts. It's the awareness that witnesses without needing to control. When this realization dawns, there's no fireworks, there's no choir of angels, there's just stillness. And in that stillness, something irreversible happens. You stop searching, you stop chasing the next ritual, the next guru, the next peak experience. You stop looking for something to complete you. Because you see the truth, Kundalini wasn't something to earn, it was something to remember. And now that you've felt it, nothing outside of you can ever measure up. Your life doesn't suddenly become easier, but it becomes unmistakably yours. You don't escape the world. You see through it. The lies, the noise, the constant reaching for something more. It all starts to fall away. And what you're left with is space. And in that space, a deep knowing that this path was never about transcendence. It was about embodiment. Awakening doesn't mean you rise above the human experience. It means you hold it in both hands, eyes wide open, without flinching. You feel the sorrow, the joy, the frustration, the ecstasy, not as obstacles to your growth, but as sacred invitations into presence. Because presence is the altar, and your life is the offering. So what now? You live, fully, honestly, without pretense. You return to the simplicity you once overlooked. You taste your food more slowly. You walk without rushing. You speak with fewer masks. You begin to understand that sacredness isn't something you find in temples or scriptures. It's something you carry. And the more you trust it, the less you need to prove it. Real power doesn't announce itself. It radiates in silence. And yes, the world will still pull at you. Old patterns will knock on your door, but you'll notice the difference. You'll catch the loop before it spirals. You'll pause when you used to react. You'll choose differently, not because someone told you to, but because you finally can. That's the gift of Kundalini. Not control, but awareness. Not escape, but intimacy with every moment. And when you live from that place, everything changes. Not all at once, but gradually, deeply, irrevocably. Before you go, don't forget there's far more to all of this than what we could say here. That's why we created the free newsletter, Insights Academy. It's where we go deeper, beyond the veil, beyond the surface. And for a limited time, you'll receive the Kybalion ebook at no cost. The link is in the description. Don't miss it. Because this isn't just knowledge, it's remembrance. And remembering who you are changes how you move through the world. Not louder, not brighter, just truer. And in a world drunk on illusion, truth is the most radical act of all. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.